Okay, the stream is live. The session is recording. And then when you go into executive session, I'll just move everyone into the executive session like we did before. And then you can end the executive by kind of just returning to the main room. And I'll make sure that the stream keeps going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, if everybody's ready, we'll get started.
I'm ready.
All right. And good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the May 14th, 2020 board meeting of the Streetsboro City Schools Board of Education. Mr. Scarsapino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Baba,
Here.
Mrs. Campbell,
Here.
Mr. Gibson,
Here.
Mr. Grimm,
Here.
Mr. Violi.
Here.
And if you please stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the
to the
flag
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 of the United
of the
States
United
of
States of
America,
America.
and
to the republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one
One
nation,
nation,
one
under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and justice
for
for all.
all.
Okay, I did not receive any requests for any public comments or emails. We didn't necessarily promote anything because we're not sure how we were going to handle that. Hopefully we'll be back next month in a regular building and we can figure out a way to do that. CJ, you haven't received any requests either.
No, sir.
And Mr. Dalbo, I don't believe you have either.
No,
No,
sir.
Okay. All right, then. Moving on to the approval of minutes. It is recommended the Board of Education approve the minutes from April 9th, 2020 as submitted.
I'll move. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes. Motion carries. Moving on to Superintendent's report. Mr. Dalba.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I have a fairly lengthy report, but as we're beginning to close out the school year, there are several important items that I need to keep all of you informed on. So I'm going to start my report by letting all of you know that I'm going to ask Mr. Grimm to remove the request for executive session. I don't have anything, so I know that this is probably a first for many of you, but we do not have any pressing items that need to be in executive session tonight.
Okay, thank you,
So-
Mike.
All righty. So the first item on my agenda, I want to talk about graduation or the graduation diploma requirements policy that is attached below. This is just simply in response to the modified graduation requirements that were passed by the House bill that will allow our current seniors to graduate, even though maybe we haven't completed all of the end of course exams and so forth and so on, obviously because we were in the COVID closure. So this is just modifying our current policy to allow this to happen to reflect current Ohio Revised Code. Were there any questions about that? I thought it was somewhat self-explanatory, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions about it, and I would try to answer it if you had any.
No, I have none.
I'm good. Look good to me.
Yeah, I'm good as well.
All right. Okay, so then moving on, item number 2, again, this is just another quick one, but typically in May, and Kevin's always our good reader, but we always put the student handbook on. And I decided not to put that on. I am going to share that out to all of you board members for you to read, but we're going to delay putting the handbook on until probably July or maybe even the August meeting and maybe a special meeting in August. And the reason being is right now there are several things that we just don't know about next school year. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But right now, Mrs. Devers and I are currently working with our RN and Akron Children's Hospital to begin working on protocols centering around safety, wellness, transitioning students, staff, back to school, hand washing protocols, mask protocols, anything and everything that you might think of. And I can tell you that I didn't even think of in relationship to the possibility of coming back to school in the fall. So and those things are going to need to be included in the handbook. So I thought it would be a little redundant to approve it twice or even to approve an addendum. So I'm going to propose, unless I hear some strong objection, I'm going to propose that we hold off on a handbook until August or July, late July, for all of those reasons. So I would welcome feedback on that from any of the board members.
I'm okay with it. I don't know that there's any reason why you would have to get it approved now. I don't see any harm in waiting.
Sounds like a really good idea, actually.
Yeah, I agree. I think doing it more than once is just silly. We have no idea of what's to come.
And Mrs. Baba, are you okay with that as well?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I am. I was nodding my head, but yes, I'm
Okay.
good with that.
Actually, I don't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see that. I should probably put those on. Oh, that's why I don't have them on. They're dirty. All right, so that's what we'll do then. And I will have Sue share the current handbook out to all of you via a Google Doc so you can start reading through it. There were some minor changes. There are some things that still need to be changed because we are in the process of hiring some secretarial staff, so those will change as well. But you guys will see the meat of that handbook when it comes out. So we'll make it so that you can comment, or you can just send me back an email if you see some things, typo, because I can read through that thing 100 times and we can have lots of people read through it. And for some reason, you always miss little periods or typos. So I would welcome the feedback. All right, so my next item on the agenda for planning for the next school year. So this, I'm going to apologize now. This could be a lengthy discussion, but maybe not. So I want to be realistic with my board. I want to be realistic with any of our public that is listening to us. And also I want to be realistic with our staff that may be listening to us as well. We've had a significant amount of planning that's been going into what we're going to do next year. And the reality is that until we hear concrete guidance, which has been very absent, not due to anyone's fault, it's the nature of the beast, if you will, we don't know what next year is going to look like. So what we decided to do long ago, and we've put a framework into place, and we're going to do some staff development with our staff, and we are going to approach planning for next year in 3 ways. The first way we're going to plan for is a traditional start. Obviously, we don't need to do a whole lot of planning for that because we already do that every year. But that's, making your class lists, which are already being done, getting ready with our supplies, which are already being done, building bell schedules, bus routes. Andres is working on the traditional bus routes, food services, everything. All the traditional things that we normally do, we are planning right now to get ready for the fall. Those things typically start March and April. We did delay some of that, but these are all in full swing, and our administrators and our teachers and our staff members are working hard on these. So that's the first item that we're going to plan for. Now, the second 2 are the ones that folks probably, don't want to have to think about as possibilities, but very frankly, they're very much possible. So the second, we're going to take our staff through a planning process on June 1st and 2nd, a very structured planning process. And we're going to have a structured document that grade level teams, departments, and staff members are going to have to fill out. And basically the first part of that document is going to be, we lived in a digital world, literally overnight, we were thrust into that. So it evolved from March 16th until today. And so we want to take our staff through a process of basically what worked, what didn't work, what do we need in order to make this work better next time around, what supplies did you use? Because we had folks, we used Google Classroom, but then we had different departments, different grade levels using different resources the teachers found. We want to try and corral that in a little bit so that we're a little more succinct in our approach next year. So we're going to take them through that exercise first. We're going to talk about assessment. We're going to talk about attendance, all of those things. Then we're going to go into a two-step planning process. So then the next part of the document that they're going to have to brainstorm and fill out will be if we return next year in a hybrid approach. And what I mean by that is this. You'll see in the paper and you'll hear on the news, they use the word blended learning. That actually legally is not the correct term. In Ohio Revised Code, blended learning is something completely different than what will occur next year. What could occur next year would be a hybrid approach to learning. And what that could look like is something like this. Now, please understand that this is an example, okay? Mike Dalbaugh is not saying that this is what the Streetsboro City Schools will do next year. I'm simply giving you an example of what a hybrid approach to school next year could look like. And the governor did talk about this, and it's been in the paper. A hybrid approach could look something like this. If we have to stick with social distancing and the number we're hearing is around 10 to 12 kids, no more than 10 to 12 kids per classroom, no more than 9 kids per bus, no uses of cafeterias, large gathering spaces. So we would have to deal with that. So a hybrid approach could look something like this. You have a classroom of 24 kids. Again, I'm going to just use a simple concept. If we can only have 10 to 12 kids in a classroom, we would take that 24 and we would divide it in two. So a hybrid approach could look like this. All the students with the alphabet A through L would come to school on Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, that would be an office hours, a time for a teacher or a staff member to connect with all the kids, digital learning. Then on Thursday and Friday, letters M through Z could come to school and receive the same curriculum that the A through L received on Monday and Tuesday. You know, lots of ways you could do that, but that would be one example of a hybrid approach. You could do the same. That would be more of a probably an elementary model, but you could do that basically all the way up through high school. Some of the challenges of that you still have to address, though, are busing. If we're hearing right now, and again, this isn't official by any means, that if we stay in the current state of affairs, busing could look like only 9 kids per bus, social distancing, masks, sanitizing. So how would we manage busing? That's going to be another challenge that we're beginning to work through. So with our teachers, we're going to say to them, if we are in a hybrid model next year, and it looks like some of your kids for 2 days, some of your kids for 2 days, and then maybe we flip that. What do you need to make that happen? What technology do you need? What curricular materials do you need? What worked this year that could work in that situation? What absolutely did not work this year and would not work in that situation? Are there specialized training that our teachers need, our staff members need, and our kids need? So this is going to then, because our staff members are the people in the trenches. They know what worked. They know what didn't work. They know what the challenges were. So we're going to have them go through that model, basically. And I'm going to talk about assessment when I'm done talking about all of this. So we need them to look critically at that, delivering instruction in a hybrid model. Okay.
Mike, I'm
Then the
sorry to
third-
interrupt you, but Mike, I believe we lost Denise. If that's okay.
Yeah, I can hold. Yep, I can hold.
I don't know if Andreas, I don't know if you see her logging back in or not.
I unlocked the meeting, so she'll be able to get in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Grimm, just let me know if you want me to continue and when.
All right, I'm texting her now just to make sure she knows that she's not on. I think she does. Okay, she says she's trying to log in on her laptop. Gotta love technology, right?
It's nice when it works.
Exactly.
While we have a second, this isn't anything. The other day, City Council had about, I think it was like a 45 or 50-minute delay. Just as they were getting ready to go on, they had a internet failure at City Hall.
Oh,
And
wow.
they finally got that resolved at almost, I think it was almost 8 o'clock at night, and they finally got back on. But I know the mayor was putting information out on social media, trying to let everybody know what was going on. There we go. Hi, Denise. Welcome back.
Looks like she's still connecting.
Yeah.
Are you there, Mrs. Baba?
Yep.
All right, great.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
So that's what we'll have our teachers and staff go through a plan. And it's going to be a structured document that they'll have to fill out for a hybrid start to the school year. Now, if the unfortunate circumstance presents itself that we are forced into a full digital model to begin the fall, we are going to take our staff through the same then planning cycle. Again, take a critical look at what worked this year, what didn't work, what were our challenges, what curriculum items do you need, what did you use, what do you need? And again, we're trying to get everyone down to being on the same page, and we're trying to really focus more towards student accountability because we were all over the place. And I'm going to talk about equity here in a minute. So what does a digital curriculum look like, and how do we deliver that? I want to say right now, again, publicly, and I said this before, that our teachers did an absolutely outstanding job delivering a digital curriculum. They weren't trained to do that, and they literally were thrust into that model overnight. And from my perspective, they hit it out of the park. But I will also then say, and I think our staff and teachers would agree with you, that if we are forced into that next year, they need more support, and we need to give them more, provide them with more support, whether that be technology support, whether that mean curricular support, a digital curriculum. So we really want to spend time then on what it's going to take to successfully pull off a digital curriculum next fall, if that's the model we're forced into. One of my particular concerns, which is what we're going to hear me talk about this a little later as well, is what I would call equity at home. And equity at a home for our students takes on puts on many hats, takes on many flavors. Equity at home can mean not every student in our district has the same internet connection. Not every student in our district has internet connection. So if a child in my home has a spotty internet connection and they can't really access video or log on to group chats, that's an equity issue. So how do we get a digital curriculum to those kids? We have kids at home that don't have computers or Chromebooks. So we are in the process of right now, we are rolling out a one-to-one initiative next year. We have taken the funds that we are going to use for a textbook adoption, and we rerouted those. They were already appropriated, and we've rerouted those because we strongly believe that we're going to be in one of two models in the fall. A hybrid model, which would require every kid to have technology, or a full digital curriculum, which will require every student to have technology. And an example I would give you would be, we have a lot of families in this district, and we did some technology distribution this year on the fly to get some technology into homes where kids didn't have it. But we just didn't have the capacity to send 5 or 6 Chromebooks into a family home where a family had 5 or 6 kids. By rolling out a one-to-one program, and Andreas is working very hard on that, that family that has more than one student and across grade levels, they'll have access to technology for each one of their students. We are also looking at ways to get internet access out to folks, or help them with internet access. We were just notified by the governor's office today, no, I'm sorry, it was yesterday, that they want us to poll all of our families to find out who has internet access and who has computers. Those 2 simple questions. And we're going to be rolling that survey out to all parents, and I'm going to do a blast call about that to get that data. Then we're going to actually upload that data back into the state software system, so that we're hoping that the governor is going to take that other portion of the CARES funding. I think it was 10% that he has discretionary decisions on, And he's going to take that, we're hoping that he's going to take some of that 10% and address internet connectivity issues around the state of Ohio for students. I think that that is a sign that's pointing toward the fact that we could be a hybrid model next year, or we could be a digital model next year. But again, we don't know. So equity takes another flavor as well. When we're talking about equity, there's also equity in assessment. This year, one of the trickiest things I think our teachers would share with you, again, so you have equity as far as technology access, internet access, but then you also have equity in grading. So when a kid's at home, we have lots of different profiles of families. We have families where mom and dad worked every day. And so they had maybe a grandma or a babysitter of some sort, or a sibling there. And so that child sitting in front of the computer may have been a first or second grader, maybe didn't have the same opportunity to access curriculum that another second or third grader might have had, that had a mom standing over his or her shoulder. That's an equity issue. So how do you adequately assess both of those kids? You can't fairly assess both of those kids. So our teachers are going to have to think about that. How are we going to address equity that way? Also, we did the best we could assessing students in this fourth quarter, being on a digital curriculum, but I'm going to be honest with you, there's equity issues, and I apologize for keep using the word, but that's the correct word to use. How do you assess a student on a concept via Google Classroom or a form that you send home when all you need to do is pick up this and Google an answer? All right. So then that's an equity issue. So our teachers are going to be challenged with, if we're in a hybrid format, then we're going to suggest that you only do formative assessment while they're at home learning. Those are the things that support instruction. They gauge how students are learning, formative assessments. So they can be like homework checks. Or I taught this concept in chemistry. I'm going to shoot them a quick formative quiz. It's not going to necessarily count as a grade to see how many of those kids got it. Because what we don't know is, when you send that quiz home, we don't know if they really truly learn the concept, or if they're just accessing the information using another device or opening another window. So we're going to suggest in a hybrid situation that all summative assessment occurs brick and mortar. Now, if we're in a completely digital curriculum, that's going to be the tricky part. So our teachers are going to be really challenged with, how do you do both formative? That's a little easier because I just explained that. But how do you do a summative assessment when you have no idea if that little second grader has any support at all standing next to him or her as they're trying to learn in a digital format, or that high school student really truly got that pretty intense chemistry discussion, and whether or not they're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't get it, so I'm going to Google the answers. So that then begins, it's going to take you back to, and I'm sure all of you guys have heard this before, but there's been a big push through the years for project-based learning and application-based assessment. And what I mean by that is this, is that we're going to have to come up with summative assessments that don't just say, what is the square root of whatever, or tell me the theorem for this, or diagram this sentence, or solve these 5 math problems. Rather, it's going to have to be, okay, here's the concept you learn. Now apply it. Tell me how you would apply it to this situation. And then you can assess whether or not they have mastery. And that's not going to be something you can just sit and Google. So we're going to have to think more of those higher level application-based assessments if we're forced into an all digital environment. And we do that in our classrooms, but we've never done this digital thing before, purely all digital. So that's going to be a challenge. So we're going to take our teachers through those exercises, and I'm going to really, really, really push and emphasize, and I say a lot of us worked on this, Mr. Isle, Mrs. Devers, we spent a lot of time designing this, and we're still working on it, this framework to collect this data. And then this is going to drive our planning for the summer and drive our staff development prior to coming back to school. And we're anticipating that there's going to be a need for staff development. There's going to be a need for purchasing of digital curriculum, which we're beginning to budget for. We're going to anticipate there's going to be a need for training in the use of digital curriculum, using video to help teach, flipped classrooms, whether or not we roll out a Zoom platform, because we discovered that Google Meet was great, but it wasn't ideal for keeping students on task and sharing a screen, but the Zoom format does. There are lots of different things out there that we've learned in these last 6 to 8 weeks that, and a lot of teachers actually have taught us about, because they've come out, hey, you know, we found these things out, and Mr. Johansson and his tech team have run tech hangouts, and Dan Stitzel and that group, they've discovered some amazing teaching tools, and by just sharing with each other. So we need to corral all that, database all that, figure out what's good, what wasn't good, and what can we all use at each level, because it's going to be different every level, in order to deliver a successful curriculum and to make it equitable. I just threw a lot at you guys. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking for a minute and give you guys a chance to think about that. One other thing, and I know Cindy's sitting right, and I just glanced at her, she has a smile on her face. There's also huge challenges for our gifted populations and for our students with disabilities. And that's all part of this planning process that we're going to take our teachers through. We're going to be sending a letter out in the morning to all staff with that framework on it to get them prepared for 2 days of going through that planning process. So I'm going to throw the table over to you board members for you to chime in, ask questions, reflect, and what you think.
Mike, I just a question, because I really don't know. If you were doing formative assessments with the concern of the students looking up the answers online and not really learning anything, is there any benefit to giving those assessments in a timed format?
Yes, and so let me give you an example. There are software packages available out there that you can do a timed format. There's even a webcam that can show so that you can watch. But there still is the challenge, and I was on a webinar the other day, there's still that challenge that even with our AP exams that are being given right now, and I can tell you I have 4 or 5 of my own children that took collegiate exams in a format that you just described. There's a lot of concern out there. You know, there's a lot of trust that you have to put into your students, which you should do, but there's a lot of concern out there that it's not very secure. So, and I don't want to imply that our students are going to cheat. I don't want anyone to think that, but there is a concern about keeping those secure and making sure they're authentic assessments of our students. There's always going to have to be, at some point, we're going to have to trust our kids are going to do what they need to do. And I believe that they will. But Kevin, we are looking into that. It's going to be part of our process this summer, is trying to identify, if we're in a pure digital environment, how can we adequately assess kids? And are there software programs out there that we can do that? And I know Andreas is already looking into that. I've seen some of his planning documents, and he's part of larger tech networks where tech directors all over the place are talking about those very issues. And I was on a call with the Portage County superintendents and statewide superintendents, and these are all the conversations we're all having, and we're all sharing what we can learn. And there's a big push toward that. Did that answer your question?
It did. And it also, brought up the point too, that we would have to purchase something because it's not what we already have the ability to do. So we're spending more money after they just cut so much from our district.
That's
You
correct.
know-
And we're gonna talk about that as well in a minute.
Mr.
Yeah, and one of thing that comes to mind for me is I would be concerned if they're on a time test. There's some kids that will feel stressed or anxiety because they feel like maybe they have less time than they would if they were in a classroom setting to take the test. So I understand the idea of not wanting them to be able to look up the information, Google it. But I'd be concerned the other way about the kid who feels stress or anxiety, feeling like they only have a few minutes to get something accomplished. And are they really showing their best work?
You guys are hitting the nail on the head, which is why we want to throw these questions to our teachers, because they're going to say the same things. And so my challenge back to them, if we are thrust into this environment, these are questions that we're going to have to find answers to. But our teachers are the ones in the trenches. And to me, they just lived this for the last 6 to 8 weeks and throughout this entire pandemic, at the creativity that our staff has shown. And when you put a group of teachers and staff members in one room or in a room, a Zoom room, and start listening to them come up with some of these ideas, you're just like, whoa, where did that come from? That's a great idea. And so those are Denise and
Decision. on which way we're coming back, because I believe what we're going to end up seeing is ODE is going to give some guidelines and say it's a local decision. How you come back? That's going to be a local decision. It's not going to be a statewide ODE decision. I could be wrong, but the sooner that we, Streetsboro City School District, decide in the format we're coming back, the easier it's going to be to plan and budget for next year. Now, you're going to hear me talk about the budget later on, so I'm not going to get into all those details right now because there are a ton of unknowns, and we all know that. However, as far as like what we would need from a digital perspective, the one-to-one options, these types of things are all things that we are considering, and we're making changes to what we were planning on doing with the budget next year in order to fit those needs. But we do need to know from a planning perspective sooner rather than later, when we feel comfortable making that decision, which way we're going to go, so we can start anticipating the budget and planning in that regard. That was the only part that I wanted to chime in about the budget on that.
And I
Well-
believe that's going to be, oh, go ahead, Mrs. Campbell.
No, I was just going to say that, I also agree. Our staff has done an amazing job. They have done the best they can do, if not better, given what we had and what we faced. My concerns are, how are we going to, and this is a later conversation, I'm sure, is support these kids emotionally and socially if we are in a hybrid type role, where we're down to 2 days a week. And then I agree very much with CJ on, if we are going to make a decision to do that, making it sooner rather than later, because it's not just us preparing, but it's parents may have to make job changes to support being home 2 days a week. So the more notice for everyone, obviously, the better. We don't have the answers. I think I agree with CJ in that from a business perspective, I'm not getting anything to run my companies that are telling me you have to do this, this, and this. They're giving us guidelines and we're making things happen. So it's the same as here.
Yeah, I would anticipate that we're going to know how this opening goes of our state. We're going to know how that goes probably by early to mid-June. And I think that that's going to probably drive a lot of decisions. So I want to start planning for multiple contingencies, but I think that we're going to probably I think the writing will be on the wall by mid-June. And I would anticipate us having a special meeting or funneling towards some pretty concrete decisions in early July to address what CJ was saying, but also to address what Mrs. Campbell was saying regarding planning for our families and our community.
Good.
It's too soon to do that now. I do know, I've talked to other superintendents who aren't even going to go through this planning process until mid-June because they feel like it's wasted time. Certainly, every superintendent's entitled to do what they want to do for their district. I just felt, I will tell you that it's almost unnerving to think about not starting to plan multiple contingencies, especially in light of our budget cut that we received, the sucker punch of a budget cut that we received via email that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So I think that makes it even more critical that we start planning multiple contingencies. And I know that CJ is working 10, 12, 14 hours a day trying to figure things out financially for us. He and I speak multiple times a day, sometimes even in the evening or early morning. I don't know about him, but sometimes just talking to him makes me feel better. But then on the same token, I get off the phone and you're just sick to your stomach because there's just so many unknowns. And so trying to plan for what we don't even know is it's a bit unnerving. But be that as it may, we're gonna move forward. And what I promise all of you board members and what I promise our community is that we're gonna make decisions based on data when the data is available to us, and the decisions that we make, we are gonna make for what we feel is best for our students and our staff and our community. We don't have that data yet, so we're trying to plan in those multiple formats. The governor even threw out some, at least to me, some pretty surprising news today that just leaves me speechless. But again, I don't know enough about the concrete plans because concrete plans haven't been laid out. So I guess we need to wait and see what the data shows us. But again, around these three models of planning: traditional, a hybrid, or full digital, with an emphasis on each part being equitable in our distribution of technology, access, assessment. Anyone else have any ideas, thoughts that you want to throw in? Are you okay with that? And by the way, I will share that planning document with you, the survey that we send out. Once we send that out to staff, I will share that with all of you so that you can take a look at what we're having everyone do. I will include you in the letter tomorrow with staff so that you can see what we're saying to staff tomorrow. They're going to get that letter in the morning. And once that data is collected, I will make sure that I keep all of you informed. And of course, I would do a board report on that as well. And if it necessitates a meeting in earlier, before June, whatever the wording is, the second Thursday in June, then I will ask Mr. Grimm to consider calling a special board meeting.
Like,
So,
Mr. D, has there been any communication about sports for next year, the next round of sports?
no, there has not. Mr. TV Paul, as all of you know, is on a regional board, and he was actually a part of a teleconference, Zoom conference today. And Jerry Snodgrass, the director of the OHSAA, he said that there have been no decisions made yet. He feels optimistic about some sort of sports start in the fall, but the data is just not there. What we have to see have happen is what happens this summer as we open back up the state of Ohio. More people are out there. We open up our parks, our campgrounds, our pools. It looks like in some form they're gonna. Governor Wine at least said today, and again, I'm only going on reading some tweets and some articles that somehow they're going to allow baseball and softball. I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but we'll see. But Randy, Mr.
Daycares for the end of the month too.
Yep,
Yes.
daycares, swimming pools. So, all of which, lots of things coming out of mouths and noses and both of those scenarios, and which my understanding is how germs are transmitted. Can't wear a mask in a pool. Not sure how you'll wear a mask playing an athletic event. That'd be interesting. Better have some oxygen on the side waiting for when the people pass out. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert, but Brian, to answer your question, very frankly, nothing yet. But one thing I appreciate about Jerry Snodgrass, the director of OHSA, is he's been very careful and slow to make decisions until he has all the data. Then he makes it. He's not been making any snap decisions. And I sent him an email not long ago applauding him for doing that, because I think we can't take our hope away from our kids. And so we have a lot of athletes that want to participate in sports and band and cheerleading in the fall, those extracurriculars. And for me, the message I want to send to those kids is we don't have enough data to make that decision yet. So what you need to do in your mind is, sure, you need to probably in your mind begin thinking about what it might look like if you don't have that opportunity in the fall. But hey, let's not take that away from them. Keep training and keep working hard in anticipation of having those events. And then if we have to cancel those events because we're ordered to, then that's what we have to do, and we'll figure out what to do at that point. But I don't want to take hope away from our kids.
I just want to, I want to throw this out there because I think it's important that we have the intended goal to be in the buildings with our kids at the start of the year, and be cautious that we're delivering a message that we are going to go a different direction. I mean, until you get all the data and make the decisions, I think the goal should be open, normal.
Well, that is the goal, and which is why I started with a traditional start to the school year, and those things are already all in place. When we're planning for a traditional start, though, I will tell you that as far as like ordering of supplies and materials, we typically order for the entire school year, paper, art supplies, things like that. We are only preparing for a soft start of maybe August, because if we were to only come back in a traditional or a hybrid format or even a full digital format, we will not have wanted to spend a bunch of money on things that we won't use. But Brian, we absolutely are planning on a traditional start, but I am really pushing We know how to do that. We've done that for the history of education as far as I've been in it. I've been in it 29 years, and that's the only way we've ever started education is a traditional start. So we already know how to do that. So yes, you're right. We're planning for traditional start. That's the goal. That's what we want to do. But we've got to plan for these other two scenarios.
Mr. Dalbaugh, if I could just add to that, Mr. Dalbaugh is correct. I sent guidance out to staff about next year requisitions, and that guidance was to only put in the requisitions that are going to be absolute necessities when we come back, if we are able to come back in August, because we don't want all of those requisitions or purchase orders sitting there that aren't going to be necessary, sucking up areas of the budget that they don't need to be at this time. So the plan is to start with the necessities and go from there until we get more guidance from a budget perspective. Brian, just so you're aware of that I did send that type of guidance out. Things that I asked them not to be putting in for were things that would be, we're going to have some certain parties. So we're going to put in POs for Walmart or Giannino's. We don't know that we're going to need those yet. So we don't want to be putting in for things like that just yet. And there's some other specific things that people have reached out to me about that I've let them know either go ahead or don't with some of those things. Some of those bills we know are going to come. Like we know elevators have to get inspected no matter what. So we can put in a requisition for the entire year for elevators, but we're being cautious.
Brian, does that answer your question or address your concern?
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay, so I will involve you board members, all of you, as we send those items out so that you can see them. I will just CC the board as I normally do, and you guys will get those. And just remember to text or call me or email me individually if you have questions or concerns or ideas.
Okay.
All right, moving on down to the next item on my agenda. There is a document down in the administrative section. So if you want to open it, you can do that. But this is our fourth quarter grading policy that we are going to, that we have implemented. You will see that later on the agenda. I'm going to ask for your approval. So again, I know you guys are tired of hearing me say the word equity, but one of the challenges was we literally sent kids home overnight, and they were forced into this model. And for all the reasons I talked about earlier regarding assessment, equity, access to technology, access to internet, the current mental health crisis that's going on in our country with kids whose parents have lost their jobs. While the sickness has been limited in Streetsboro, there have been sicknesses in Streetsboro with COVID-19 that has affected families directly and indirectly with grandparents, neighbors. So there's also a mental health crisis going on. So we designed a grading policy that I will tell you is not unlike most of the districts around Ohio and in this region, that we're basically holding our kids harmless for something that was completely out of their control. Kids have no control over the fact that we sent them home overnight. They have no control over the fact that they may or may not have a computer. They have no control over the fact that their internet does or doesn't work. They have no control over the fact that they have moms or dad or grandma or someone standing over there helping them with their work or not. All those things I talked about earlier, we can't hold kids responsible for that. So we directed our staff to continue instruction, identify those critical things between the time we left and the end of the year that kids needed to have in order to move forward. And the teachers did that. And as all of you, I'm sure, would suspect, we had kids that did every single thing we asked. We had kids that struggled to do that for lots of the things I just talked about. And then we had kids that we never heard from, even though we did phone calls, we did emails, we would send an SRO to the house. Very frankly, we had kids that we didn't hear from, families that we didn't hear from. And that's because we were thrust into an environment that no one ever dreamt of or expected. Okay. So when you take a look at that grading policy, and I included both the letter that's going to go out tomorrow to all parents describing this, as well as the staff has already been notified this, but we'll send it out to the staff again as well. In grades K to 8, we made assignments, and we graded assignments throughout this entire closure on a pass-fail basis. So when a student turned that assignment in, they either passed it or they failed it. Okay. And then we recorded that. Our teachers kept track of that in their online grade books. Now, depending on how they did on those on those assignments that have been made between when we left and the end of the year, will help determine their grade. Now, we took every kid's grade in grades K to 8, and we took their third quarter grade. So if Mike had a C in math at the end of the third quarter, they're based on the work that I did or that student did, they cannot get lower than their third quarter grade. Because again, we did not want to punish kids for all the things I just talked about. So let's say I have a C in math at the end of the third 9 weeks and I do nothing. I finish with a C for the fourth 9 weeks. If I turn in all my work, and some of it's good, some of it's not. Yeah, I did okay on this concept, didn't do okay on that concept. And the teacher shows that I showed some mastery, I could improve that C to a B, or maybe if I really hit it out of the park, I could improve that C to an A for the fourth quarter. So the idea is we're not gonna hurt kids for this pandemic crisis. So they're gonna at least earn their fourth quarter or third quarter grade for the fourth quarter. But if they showed that they attended school online, they did their work, put effort into it, they can improve that fourth quarter grade. In those classes in the middle school, there were some related arts classes that like art, I'll just use art as an example, that maybe Miss Koppel didn't even have those students. So she didn't know them and she didn't have a grade for them. And so they would have been in art for the first time in the fourth quarter. They either were going to earn an A, B, or C based on the work completed, or if they didn't do anything, we were going to drop that course. Again, with the idea is that we're not going to harm kids for being thrust into this crisis. At the high school, it takes a little bit of a different flavor, but it's basically the same. We're going to operate from that third quarter grade, and we're going to, they're either going to improve upon that third quarter grade or it'll stay the same. But when you're looking at high school transcript and the calculation of grades, typically what it is it's when you're looking at that overall cumulative grade for the year, it's based on 20% of the first 9 weeks, 20% of the second 9 weeks, 10% of the semester exam, 20% for the third 9 weeks, 20% for the fourth 9 weeks, and 10% for the final exam. All that then is calculated into a final transcripted grade for the year. So that was the tricky bit that we had to work with. So what we did is we counted the first marking period as 20%, the second grading period as 20%, the semester exam is 10, so that's 50%. And then the third marking period plus the work that they did or didn't do would account for the remaining 50%, with the idea that the third quarter grade is the grade that stands unless they improve upon it. And then that's how we'll calculate their transcripts. Mr. Hogan, his team worked on that pretty hard with the guidance counselors and his building leadership team. And they were satisfied with that model as well. I will tell you that this overall district model is pretty similar to what I would say the majority of the school districts are doing around Ohio. There are some that are doing some things radically different, but I will tell you the ones that are doing things radically different had different access to technology, had different access to digital curriculum than our kids did. There are school districts around Ohio that have been doing digital learning for a long time and have incorporated that into their brick and mortar. We have not. So that's why we came up with this model. We felt that this model gives a student an opportunity to improve their grade, but it holds those kids harmless for the ones that didn't necessarily have the same equity issues. I will tell you that the feedback from staff has been mixed, and I'm okay with that because our teachers, all of them, pre-K to 12, are scholars. They are people that demand the best from their kids. They want the best from their kids, and they put a lot of time and effort into teaching their kids for mastery. So this policy goes against the grain for someone that does what they do. But when you take a step back and you take a look at this this was a humanitarian crisis. And for all the things I just talked about, this happened overnight. And all these factors are at play in our students' homes. The majority of our staff, while some didn't agree, could take a step back and say, we understand why we have to do it this way, which is why we're not going to do it this way next year if we're thrust into the same format, which is why we talked about how we're going to spend a lot of time on designing assessment and making it equitable if we're forced into a modified or a full digital format next year. Does that all make sense? And I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to throw this open to all of you to ask questions for clarification.
Now, Mike, it all makes sense. And while you were talking, a story popped up on my phone from Associated Press. Other schools obviously are facing the same challenges. This story was about schools in Georgia pulling the plug on distance learning early in the year because they had just over 50% of their students with internet access. So it's all the same problems that you were talking about. And I don't think there's one good solution except getting the kids back in the classroom if it can be done safely.
Yep, I agree. Mr. Gibson, you look like you want to say something.
No, I was finishing reading through it after you read it to us.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were trying to unmute yourself. I apologize. Anyone else?
That's my thinking
I know
face.
I know I threw a lot at you, board, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to take time to go through that. One other quick thing I did want to say is that we were calculated on when we put this out. I know that that's going to create some anxiety out there and probably even some dissent, but we didn't want a message to be sent to anyone that their work was not important, because it is important. And we are still giving the students all the way up until the last day opportunity to turn anything in that they haven't done. And that doesn't normally happen either. We're basically saying anything that you haven't done, get it in, turn it in, and we will use that to help improve your grade. So, but we didn't want the message to be that, oh yeah, well, we don't care about what you're doing, and then thus not give students the motivation to keep working hard. And so we were calculated and strategic on when we deliver this message, but I felt like it was time to do so tonight, and this will go out to all of our parents tomorrow.
I think it's if I can use the word fair, this was such an unusual circumstance. And as you noted earlier, these kids have a lot going on in their lives right now. Again, I don't want to just rehash everything you said, but there's parents that could be out of work. They may not have the best supervision. And I don't know how how you can factor all those things in and demand that the kids, act as if they're still in the classroom. So I think this is I think probably one of the best options that we have available right now. So I absolutely support the plan that you presented.
Okay. Anyone else want to give their opinion, chime in?
I agree.
Yeah, no, I was reading through it. I think it's very fair. And I also think it was a really good idea to wait this long to release it. Not just so that people don't think their work doesn't count, but there's just kids that are always looking for the better angle. And having this grading policy 3 weeks ago would have definitely made some of those kids a little less motivated to get things done.
Yeah, and I agree. I think this, having not come out right away and saying, we're done, this is it, giving kids the opportunity to make it better, but we're not taking anything away from them, I think is the best of both worlds given the situation.
All right, so board, I do want to apologize to you if you end up getting difficult questions or comments regarding this. I will take full responsibility for this. The Board of Education's hearing this tonight for the first time. They did put their eyes on some drafts, but I will, I want to say that my administrative team, I'm blessed to have a lot of good people around me helping me with this. A lot of mine's better than my own, help me with this. And And like I said before, I think it's the best for the situation. It's not perfect, but I think it's the best for the situation. So I will ask all of you to vote on this later. But again, board members, I apologize if this puts you in tough situations, and you can certainly deflect any questions or comments to me.
Mike, in my opinion, the fact is that this is a no-win situation for any of us. And you're with your team, you're just doing the best that you can. And I think it's a great decision so far.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll move on now to the CARES funding. You've heard lots about the CARES funding. So I did put that document in your administrative file that shows all of the school districts across the state of Ohio. We have not received that yet, but it is coming, and they're going to use the Title I, our federal programs. It's called the CCIP, where we receive all of our federal funds through. We're going to receive those monies through that. But Streetsboro was awarded right around $204,369 in CARES funding. There are very little restrictions for that, So thankfully, we can use some of those monies. Again, CJ and I, along with the administrative team, are doing lots of planning. We're being very careful on how we do things. What's nice about this CARE funding is that we do have to fill out the application, which is very simple. And even though the ODE is and the feds are telling us that we fill it out for effective June 30th for the next budget year, which starts July 1, we can actually spend back to the day that our students were sent home, I think, which was March 16th. So even though it's going to be a budgeted item for July 1, we can actually draw down on that money prior to July 1, or I suspect, and I don't want to answer for CJ, probably the easier thing for us to do on accounting purposes will be not to draw down on anything until after July 1. But what will be cool is that we'll be able to spend retroactively back to March 16th. That will make our accounting a little easier for our auditing purposes. But that money is coming. We are beginning to look at the way to spend it. The guidance for us was the reasons for this, and I think you guys probably all heard this in various formats, was to look at things like how you had to roll out technology in an overnight's notice, needs for technology for next year. They said things like your food services. We were all thrown into a food service model that we've never done before. Things like sanitizing, planning for sanitizing, PPEs for next year. Modifying our offices that we're in the process of doing right now with sneeze guards, all those types of things. So it's very loose on what we can spend this money for. And credit to Mr. Scarsapino there. He and I have been talking, but he's a guy that's he's very much a planner, and he's a process thinker. So he creates lots of lists and charts, and he and I are going to spend a lot of time, and we are not going to haphazardly spend any of that money until we have the data we need. But I did want you to hear the dollar amount and see the PDF for yourselves. Are there any questions around that CARES funding? CJ, you want to chime in a little bit?
Yeah, just briefly, I've heard potentially that money is going to land in the CCIP by May 20th, potentially. It's still not out there yet. If it was out there, I'd be asking you to amend appropriations this evening. When that money does come, we are going to need to amend our appropriations in the tune of that. Just so everybody knows, this is not like a check that we're just going to get and deposit in the bank. This is something that we spend and then we put in submission to get that money in return. So we have that allotment that we can spend up to. We then put in for reimbursement through ODE, and then that money comes to us through reimbursement and PCRs and FERs, which are things that we do throughout the year. Just to be completely transparent and clear about those funds. The way that these funds were determined upon was you have Title I funds that are granted to you every year through the federal government and through ODE. Our Title I funds for this year were about $260,000 in federal grants. This allotment of cash was about close to 80%. It was a little less than 80% of those funds. That was the guidance that was set out of how those funds were going to be allocated. 80% would have put us right around 208. So again, it's a little less than 80% of that. And then ODE was allowed to keep a certain percent of those funds for themselves for discretionary funds and administrative costs and things of that nature. So just a little bit of the mindset of where those funds came from, how they were allocated throughout the state, and things of that nature. Just wanted to chime in there, Mr. Dalbaugh.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
CJ and Mike, if you could, correct me if I'm wrong, but the money that we're receiving from this is not making up for what was already taken through the budget
No.
cut from
No, Miss,
Um,
the state.
That's the next item on our list. That's a perfect segue, Mr. Grimm. If you guys look at the PDF, I attached it in the administrative section from the state, and it outlines the budget cuts by district. We received a $495,000 budget cut for the fourth quarter, basically between when this crisis started in June 30th. So you can see it's not even half of what they took from us. And I'm going to let CJ kind of take the reins on this discussion regarding what this budget cut looks like, but it's significant. I will tell you that what we're hearing right now, and CJ will talk about this during the 5-year forecast, and I'm sure I'll chime in now, but, we're getting word that, for next year, again, we don't know, but we're being told that this could be 4 times this next year to our foundation, along with a possible or a likely property tax, a delay in revenue or a delay in collection of property tax as well. So this is going to have a significant impact on our budget, but they took $495,000 from Streetsboro. CJ, can you give them a little more on that?
yeah. So, Mr. Grimm, to answer your question, we're in a net loss of about $290,000 when you take the CARES fund versus what was taken from us with one fell swoop from ODE, like 290, 675, 92 to be exact of a net loss. So when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, ODE provides a state foundation payment of right around $5.5 million, which is paid to us in 2 pays per month each month throughout the school year. Out of that 5.5 million, 495,000 represents right around 9% of what we get from the Ohio Department of Education. That was cut out in a quarter here for us. So that was about a little over a 9% reduction of funds for us. Now, if you've ever looked at a statement of settlement or a foundation report, there's a line on it that is line A, and it shows your total amount at state funding you're going to get, and then how much you're owed and your bi-monthly funding, etc. And then after that, there's a bunch of deductions: community school deductions, STEM school deductions, open enrollment deductions, and so on and so forth. And then there's your STRS and SERS deductions. What we are not aware of yet, and we're going to be finding out on our next payment, which I believe is May 22nd, is how exactly that 495 is going to come out. I know they're going to take it out over the next 3 payments. They're saying they're going to take it out of line A on the report, which then shows that we have enough money to take that line A out, because we were still owed right around $916,000 for the school year. However, when you get all the way down through those deductions, what was left to be paid was 303, which is not equal to 495. So unless they're going to do some sort of modification of some of those deductions that come out for community schools and the open enrollment amount and things of that nature, we may be insufficient to either ODE or to want our retirement systems, because those retirement systems deductions come out of the foundation payment. So in the case of if it would come out through the retirement systems, and what we're doing right now is we're actively engaging conversations with STRS and SERS about how we would cut them a check to make up that difference. This is money that we already have budgeted and will still be able to pay. But in essence, it's us paying back ODE for money that they've already given us, if that makes sense, how I explain that. Or we may just end up owing ODE money at the end of the day. They may just say, you owe us $195,000, Streetsboro. We're going to give you 2 options. You can cut us a check, or we can just start deducting it from your payments next year. But we don't even know what our payments next year are going to look like. But
Which will likely be reduced.
Well, they're going to be reduced. And we don't have a crystal ball, and you'll hear me in the 5-year forecast. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this right now, but it is important. When you take away 500,000 in 1 quarter, right? We're looking at, the definition of potentially a recession, which is going to be, or a depression, which is 3 consecutive quarters that are going in a decrease. So if that's the way that it's going to happen just for the end of this year, then think about 500,000 across the next 4 quarters. We're looking at a potential deduction of $2 million. Now, are we anticipating that right now? No, because we haven't been told that. But, you know, just looking at things, that is a potential of something that could happen. I don't think the state would let that happen, but I'd be lying to you if I thought that we were going to lose $500,000 in May in payments. So we're just going to have to, it's going to be a very fluid situation, and we're going to have to monitor it, and we're going to have to navigate the waters and plan and budget to the best of our abilities each and every day, and be wise about the purchases that we make.
Okay, so that's CARES funding and budget cuts from the state. Now that we've thoroughly depressed all of you, do you have any other questions regarding those 2 items?
I have a couple comments.
Faces. Go ahead, Brian.
And I'd like to probably, if everybody could draw their attention to the bottom line on these documents that Mike had sent. If you look at the ODE reductions for the whole state of Ohio, it's $300 million. And then if you look at the CARES Act, the total that they're giving the state of Ohio is $440 million. And I guess, and I talked to CJ about this a little, the other day, and I guess I'm kind of confused or a little bit upset, and I'll use less colorful words than I normally would, but that who makes the determination on who gets cut what and who gets what from the federal government? I would think that, if you're going to give the state of Ohio $440 million to help things out, and you cut $300 million out, it sounds like there's $140 million left over. Well, we're getting screwed out of $300,000 in a quarter. Just doesn't make sense to me. And I just, there's a lot of school districts that are actually in a lot worse shape than what we are. If you look at this chart, I don't know how anybody can make the calls on what they did on this. Who gets cut what? And then you can't even take the funding that the federal government is giving you and replace it. It just doesn't make sense to me. They gave more money than the state cut. The school district should get at least what they lost.
So
I don't disagree with any of that.
Mr. Violi, to address some of your questions the best of my ability, and I'll just shoot it to you straight because I always do. Title I is how they determine the federal funding. We have 2 Title I buildings, I believe, which is DEFRA and SES. Mrs. Stevers, I'm correct in saying that, correct? Okay. So that was built off of those and that dollar amount that I was stating in the Title I funds before that they took 80% of. State funding and federal funding are 2 separate pools. Now, as far as the state cuts, they have not released methodology on that per pupil number that they've come up with yet. They released some quintiles and said that this was part of the formulation, but we have not seen a try and true methodology of how our number came to what it came to. So we're waiting to see that. And I'm hearing maybe by the end of the month, we may see that, or maybe we'll see it when we get our May payment. Another thing that I would like to point out that it seems like now would be the proper time to bring it up. I'm not sure if you guys all received the email from OASBA or OASBO or BASA, but they did send out an advocacy email today where they're asking you to petition to your congressmen and your Ohio congressional representatives and senators to plead with the federal government to help school districts out with some more stimulus funding potentially, or through some things with the state. If you do not have that email, I'd be more than happy to forward that along and share to you. But I do think it's important that your voice is heard on some of these subject matters. We will be doing our part as Streetsboro and submitting anything that they ask of us to submit to help with that. I understand your frustration, Mr. Violi, and it's warranted. As far as the methodologies, that's the best I have for you as an explanation to the methodologies behind why and where and how.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I apologize that they're not more in depth, but that's the best that I have at the moment.
Anyone else? Okay, and then my final item on my report, I do want to let you know that with the help of CJ and Darlene, I'm almost finished with our RFQ to submit to the state of Ohio in order to go out to bid, interview, and potentially hire a food services company to manage our food services next year. I think it's probably even more critical that we take a hard look at this. Submitting the RFQ does not bind us to do anything, but the research, as I've shared with you before, the research shows that school districts that go with a food management company end up pulling their food service programs into the black. A lot of districts struggle to keep their food services programs in the black. It's very important to note that if we hire a food management company, all of our employees remain our employees. Nobody loses their jobs. They hold their same positions. They function in the same way. A food management company simply takes over our menus. They take over what's prepared, the items, and basically we're pulling from the power of a consortium where we are limited on where we can buy from currently on our own. When you hire a food management company, you get the power of a lot of folks working together, and it drives the prices down, which then increases the opportunities to put different types of food in front of our kids and our staff. I did talk to quite a few superintendents that did this model this year, and there were a few superintendents that I talked to that were several $100,000 in the red to finish last year, and in the first quarter we're already in the black. And the most exciting part about this is that because you have that power of a consortium or a company that can pull from a lot of resources, you can expand our menu options. And so I'm excited to see where this takes us. That application will get submitted to the state next week. Once it's approved, I will email each of you and find out who wants to be a part of the interview committee. I will accept applications from food management companies, and we're going to have to move this process along pretty quickly. But because we are in our current state of affairs, I can manage that pretty quickly. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Mr. Grimm, that concludes my report.
All right. Mr. Domo, thank you very much. Moving on to Treasurer's Report, Mr. Scarsapino.
All right. Well, I know that we've had some rough conversations about finances, and, you know, we're going to get into the forecast here in a minute, but our cash position report on the general fund, I offer some good news tonight. With that, I've been telling you for the past few months that we were going to start seeing some of these collections come in, see half of the levy money begin to come in to help us with our general fund health. So attached in board docs, you will see the report. That's a 3-year look back at the overall health of our general fund from fiscal year 18 to current. As of March 31st, 2020, the general fund has a balance of $8,069,876.44. This is a positive difference from both fiscal year 19 and 18. That's something I haven't been able to say often since I've been in this chair, so I'm happy to be able to say that to you this evening. Of $2,144,647.57 for fiscal year 19 and $1,047,754.13 for fiscal year 18. So we see that spike come. Now we'll start to probably see it decrease a little bit until our next wave of collections, because we have bills and things like that. And that was one of our primary paychecks. Okay, moving on to my next agenda item is the 5-year forecast. There's several documents attached in your board docs. I'm not gonna share the screen as a presentation for many of reasons, but mainly because then I can also see who has questions or if there are any questions as I'm presenting. So there are 3 documents. You'll see the 5-year forecast presentation. You will see the 5-year forecast, and you will see the 5-year forecast assumptions. I have forwarded all these to Mr. Johansson. As soon as we have your approval this evening, if we get your approval, those documents will be live on the website for the public to see as part of our strategic plan to post those financials as well. So once we get down to that portion of the agenda, Mr. Johansson knows to post those right after approval. So the purpose of the 5-year forecast is to engage the Board of Education and the community in long-range planning and discussions of financial issues facing the school district, to serve as a basis for determining the school district's ability to sign contracts associated with continued operations, and to provide a method for the Ohio Department of Education and Auditor of State to identify school districts with potential financial problems. As a reminder and a disclaimer, a great man once told me that this is just a snapshot in time. And that holds true more so right now than ever. This is a true snapshot in time, a best guess, a best assumption, a best try to keep us thinking on where we're going and what we're going to need to do. And that will be the theme throughout this evening, more so than normal, because there are truly a lot of unknowns, and I will discuss those unknowns with you as I always do. So line 1.010, general property tax. We are projecting a revenue of about $16,812,568. And this is showing that collection of half of our 9 mil levy that was passed in May for our January 20 through June 20 collections. From fiscal year 21 to 24, we are slated to collect the full amount of that levy. However, in fiscal year 21, the district is projecting a 10% reduction in property tax collections, and in fiscal year 22, a 5% reduction in property tax collections. This is directly related to the economic conditions related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the uncertainty of the pandemic and the unknowns, I did not feel at this time to send out every alarm and change fiscal year 23 and 24. I left those years as projected as we think those are going to come in. And I did that for several reasons. It's already hard enough in a 5-year forecast to project 5 years out, 4 years out. We gave it our best shot when we did it in November. We're going to continue with those numbers and thoughts with some adjustments that were made. However, we're also not going to start deducting 10% from property tax lines, 20% from top property tax lines in those years. We'll adjust those as needed as we have a better idea. Some may ask, where did you come up with the methodology of 10% and 5%? Well, there's no document that tells you this. There's no document from ODE. There's no document from Portage County. This was best guess based on certain economic conditions and what was shown in other economic crises. It could be 20%. It could be 3%. You know, one of the things that I discussed with Mr. Dahlbaugh as I showed him this forecast, I said, Mike, pick a number between 0 to 100. And if you're feeling lucky, let's go play the lottery if you're that sold on that percent. So we're trying to show there will be a reduction. There will be, without a doubt, there will be delinquencies. How bad those delinquencies are going to be is unknown. That 10% reduction is right around $1.9 million. Is it going to be that much? I'm not sure. Now, one thing to consider is that I didn't compound this into fiscal year 22. So it's not 15%, it's 10. And then I added 5% revenue back in fiscal year 22 with the thought that we should start to see those collections rise again, with the hopes that COVID is a distant thought and we're back to work and the economy is back to normal. Now, again, we will adjust that as necessary. Mr. Violi.
I have a question for you, CJ, and unless you want me to hold my questions until
Nope.
you're finished.
Go ahead, sir.
when I look at that first line, and I know that the 2021 property tax number that you have in there, the 17,120,000, that's a tough one to take. But my question to you is that I know that if these are delinquent taxes, eventually they'll be paid, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's something that we're going to see money back at some point. It may take a while.
Correct.
Where do we see that in a 5-year forecast, like for returns? And
Yeah,
what
so-
has been the typical loss in collections up till now?
So our delinquencies have been somewhere between 3 to 6%, depending on the year. However, with this type of economic downturn, I'm not sure where that delinquency number is going to be, and I'm not sure when those collections are going to come to light. The
'Cause you
delinquency.
that's $3 million in 2 years.
I understand that,
But
and
eventually it should come back at some point.
which
you
is
can't-
why.
Those
Which is
can't
why
go
I'm-
away, right? The delinquencies cannot go away.
No, they're
Oh,
they're
okay.
supposed to be able to be collected on through liens and other things of that nature. No doubt about that, which is part of the reason why I left fiscal year 23 untouched and fiscal year 24 untouched. Now in fiscal year 24, you see a dip again, but that's because we have renewals on the ballot. So that money comes back into play on a line 11.20, I believe is the line, where then you see that money come back in, which would put us right around a 19 million, between 19 and 20 million dollars in property tax revenue. So that's why we showed it the way we showed it, because we do know we're going to get that money at some point. We just don't know when and how. It would be reckless for me to speculate that we're going to see it in 22, because I just don't believe we will.
It's different than what the state foundation gives us. The state's taken that 495,000 away from us. They're not giving it back at some point.
No,
This is something we may not collect it, but we're entitled to it in the future.
correct. We should eventually collect it. It will be future, which doesn't help us short term, but it's also part of the reason why we showed unchanged years in 23 and 24, with the hopes that even if there is a higher delinquency in those years, because the pandemic is still going on, we should at least begin to see some of those back taxes being collected.
Got it.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Violi?
It sure does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, sir. So moving on with that general property tax line, as I did state, there's a 3.6 mil levy that generates approximately $1.6 million. It expires in 2021, but will collect through tax year 2022. And fiscal year 23 and 24, you'll see a decrease in the property tax revenue line because of that expiring levy. The decrease in fiscal year 23 is about $804,000. That's from January 23 through June 23. And then you see that full amount come off in 24. But you will see that renewals cannot be assumed in a forecast renewal passage. So we put them on line 11.20 to show what the picture will look like with those renewals in place. So keep that in mind as we're going through that. In lines 1.035 and 1.040, unrestricted and restricted grants. Unrestricted grants are known as our foundation payment, which we discussed a lot tonight, or our per pupil funding from the state. The 2020 opportunity grant was set at $6,020 per student. We have a state share index of about 32%, which gives us about a $1,900.49 per student generated through the state foundation. We're a capped district as well, so that money eventually stops after a certain point. It was announced last week that $495,045 will be cut from the district's foundation payment. So in fiscal year 21 and in fiscal year 22, we are following suit with what we did with our property taxes and taking 10% away from the state foundation payment and then giving 5% back in the state foundation payment. We left fiscal year 23 and 24 unchanged due to the uncertainty of that. And again, these assumptions are in response to the economic condition due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, will it be more than 10%? It could. I just shared with you 4 quarters what that would look like, $2 million. Do we think that's going to happen? We most certainly hope not. That would be devastating to school districts everywhere, and it would essentially wipe out all the hard work from the levy that was passed and the gift that our community gave us to continue to provide education. So we're hoping that doesn't happen, but we are following the same methodologies as we did for our property tax into our unrestricted grants. Our total restricted revenue was supposed to be right around 181,000. We've collected 152 so far this year. I'm projecting it at that 152 because given the cuts, I'm not completely certain we're going to see any more funds for that line item. So that's a fluid item. It may change. It may bump up around $30,000 potentially. I'm still waiting to see again how those deduction sheets are going to look when they come. Line 1.050 is our property tax allocation line. This includes TPP, which we're all very aware of. So what we did here is included in this line is homestead exemption and the rollback credit. What we do is we take our general property tax and take about 9% of that and add the TPP in to come up with our number on that line. That 9% has kind of held true over the years. It's been 7, 8, a little more, sometimes a little less, but historically that 9% has been a good number to us when it comes to that. Now it's going to probably, you're going to start seeing that number dwindle, and you see it dwindle in this forecast. And that is because the phase out of TPP is here, as we all know. So our TPP collections for this fiscal year, we're going to be right around $516,000. Next fiscal year, they dropped to $245,000, and that could change given the temperature of the economy right now. We may not see that, but we still are estimating that because we were told our TPP payment was still going to come this year. So that gives us hope that we're going to see it again next year. But then in fiscal year 22 and 23, our TPP collections are over. We will not see any more TPP collections. So that's why you see that number go down. Just as a point of reference, in fiscal year 18, our TPP reimbursement was $1,059,046, and it was higher than that years prior. But that's just the historical point that I like to point to show the decrease. Line 1.060, all their operating revenues. This consists of open enrollment, interest, tax abatements, miscellaneous items. For fiscal year 20, growth was estimated about 1% based off of revenue collected in fiscal year 19, minus the one-time payments from the Portage County Auditor and the City of Streetsboro. Fiscal year 20, we're projecting based on the categories we had above, minus one-time payments. And then for fiscal year 22 through 24, we're projecting a 1% increase based off of the 21 projected year to year. We're moving on to our expenditures now. Line 3.010 is our biggest expense. Again, we are in the business of educating students, not making widgets, so personnel services will always be our biggest expense. This includes salaries, overtime substitutes, supplemental contracts, and severance payments. It is the district's largest expense and fluctuates from year to year, approximately about 55% of total expenditures or more, depending on a given year. The future years of our forecast are based on the current salary schedule and current staff. And then we also added some in case we need new staff that may be necessary in years to come due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this could very easily, this amount or these dollars could have also gone into purchase services potentially, depending on a digital platform, if we had to go all digitally. But as we all agree, we would like to get back to school at some point in time. How that looks, we don't know. But given the circumstances of, 6 feet apart, how many kids you can have in classrooms, what you could do on a bus, things like that, there is anticipation that we will have costs somewhere, whether it's in personnel or purchase services or in technology, capital outlay, things of that nature, there will be a jump in expense somewhere. So this is where we chose to put it for the time being. 3.020 is our employees' retirement insurance benefits. This is STRS, SERS, workers' comp, Medicare, unemployment, and healthcare premiums. This is our second largest expense. It typically accounts for around 24% of our expenditures. Fiscal year 21 reflects an 8.9 increase to our health insurance. We received about a 7.4% increase to medical and RX rates, and 1.5% to dental rates. Vision remained the same. And then we reflect future years at 5%, with the hopes that maybe one year we'll see 3%, then we might see 5%, then we might see 8%. It gives us around 15% total across the board for the 5%. 5% workers' comp, 14% for retirements, and then 1.45% for Medicare, all assumed in this column. 80% of the district's expenditures are typically concentrated in salaries and benefits. Line 3.03 are purchase services. This includes utilities, liability insurance, legal costs, ESC costs, special education costs, computer services, copier leases, open enrollment out, community school tuition. It accounts for typically about 12% of our total expenditures, sometimes 15, sometimes 20, depending on the year. But this current year, it's going to be around 12%. Future years, we're projecting about a 2% increase. It could be greater, as I referenced above in the personal services line, due to many factors. But right now, this is where we're looking at. Line 3.040, supplies and materials. This includes educational supplies, textbooks, softwares, Chromebooks, since we're talking one-to-one, office supplies, maintenance supplies, fuel. These would be things that fall under this category. This is an expense we have some control of. One thing to point out, expenditures is we can't control revenues at this point. We cannot. We have no control over the state foundation payments. We have no control over the collections of property taxes. One thing we do have control over is expenditures. So by thoughtful planning of what we may need from a digital perspective, or what we may need in whatever form we're coming back, we can try to help control some of those expenditures, whether it be in personnel, supplies and materials, and or purchase services. Some things are out of our control when it comes to an expenditure side, but some things we can control. It's something that I stress to the administrative team regularly when we're talking about purchases and trying to be smart with our funds, making sure that every dollar counts every step of the way. So I just wanted to point that out about expenditures. And in times like this is the time we really need to be cautious with expenditures and what we're doing. One of the most important lines in the forecast is line 6.010, excess revenue over or under expenditures. This line's important because it reflects the district's financial health. A positive number indicates that the district's expenditures are not exceeding revenues. A negative number indicates that the district's expenditures are exceeding revenues. So in our last forecast, we were showing lots of positivity because the levy and things of that nature. That hasn't gone away. But because of some of these reductions, we are seeing some red there. I am still cautiously optimistic we are going to finish this year in the black. We have worked extremely hard and tirelessly as an admin team to try and keep us in that black by every stretch of the imagination. I can't promise you that that's going to be the case. It's going to be close, as you can see by the $223,000 number there. We're hopeful. We're hopeful. Now we see some other numbers there in the negative for year 21 and 22. That's in direct correlation to the reductions in the revenue line that we have above, and then the increases that we're showing in some of our expenditures due to the nature of the situation. That is just our reality at this moment. And then you see fiscal year 23, you start to see that number come back up to a positive, and then fiscal year 24, you see that in a negative. It is important to point out you see that in a negative because that renewal levy is not shown on the property tax line. So that's when I will urge you to look at line 11.020, property tax renewal. This line assumes the passage of expiring levies. And this goes back to discuss that $1.6 million renewal levy that will eventually be on the ballots in these years. And with that renewal, if we're fortunate enough to get that renewal, you will see that we start to see some positivity. What we do see here, though, is a trend of that decline in cash balance year over year. We were trying to prevent that with the 9 mil levy. Because of some of the reductions in revenue, it's going to impede us from collecting and starting to build those reserves. It is important to point out, yes, we did pass that levy. We passed that levy with the assumption that we were going to have the current level of funding from the state and delinquencies would be around the same amount that they were. It is also important to point out that we have only collected on $2.2 million of that levy. We have not even collected a full year of that levy to start building our reserves. We needed that $2.2 million to operate this year and try to stay in the positive. So it is imperative just that everybody here understands that, the community understands that, our staff understands that, the administrative team understands that. And that is the message that I try to send to them each and every time we speak about district finances. And then line 15.010 shows that unreserved fund balance. So what does the fund balance look like after renewal levies, et cetera, moving forward? And as you can see, there's ebbs and flows based off of all the factors that we just discussed throughout this presentation. It's not the worst of news. I've given these where we've been in the red everywhere, and we were going to be under fiscal watch and caution. We are optimistic that we're going to be able to stay out of those, but it's also going to depend on what some of those collections and state funding looks like moving forward. And that's just the realistic approach to this situation. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to answer them. A lot of thought has gone into this, just so you all know. We tried to take a look at it from every angle. I discussed it with several administrators in this district about certain things. I discussed it with other fellow treasurers. I've listened into a lot of webinars to kind of get a feel for what people thought. And then I took the best of what I thought was the best process and methodology and moved that forward. So I will open it to questions if there are any at this time.
CJ, just a couple of points of clarification for the public that are watching now or watching this later. You had mentioned the elimination of TPP, and that's the tangible personal property tax, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was all of the stuff inside of a business that was taxed that is no longer taxed, and that money was taken away from the schools. You talked about the per pupil funding of about $6,000 per student, just so that everybody realizes when they look through this information that we get less than $2,000 per student. So we're not getting that 100% that is available out there. But for every student that leaves Streetsboro, we have to make up that difference. So the new district gets that full amount, correct?
Correct, sir.
So, and going kind of along with what Brian had said earlier, voicing his frustrations about the budget cuts, it's just more ways that school districts get screwed in the budget, and it's left to the taxpayers to make up. Why the governor chose to take so much money away from the school districts, I will never understand when we're already struggling and we have to figure out a way to educate the children from home. And for those students that don't have the ability to have internet, or even have a computer, how do we do that? And that's more expense for us.
Correct. And Mr. Grimm, I would like to point out on that note, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I did want to mention this earlier. Out of the $776 million in cuts that were announced by the governor, 303 million were school districts, with an additional 55% or 55 million, which is going to come from other areas. That was almost 46% of that 776 million, just to put it into a percent number and perspective. I meant to share that statistic with you earlier and I forgot. So I apologize for jumping in and cutting you off there, but it felt like the appropriate time to say that.
No, thank you.
And
And for new businesses, if a new business opens in Streetsboro, let's say build a new building, how long does it take for us to realize any taxes on that property?
It would be a year. So a year in arrears. and it would depend if there was any sort of abatement on that property. If it was a new building, there's lots of variables that go into that type of product.
Yeah, but we can't collect more than than we went to the voters for. So doesn't that just get spread out?
On a levy, correct. You are correct, Mr. Violi. On inside millage, which is just a minimal
Right.
amount that we receive, we would see an uptick there.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. I'm done.
I do have a couple questions. I know that a few years back, before we put the other levy on, we had to send, I guess it was ODE, how we were going to, get past our short, right? Was that based on line 6.010 or?
Yes, typically that would be where we were looking at that. So our excess revenues, we would look there first to say we're projecting that we are $1 million in the hole. But just to be clear, Mr. Violi, we would be put in that situation by ODE where we would have to fill a form out like that if our cash reserves were showing in the negative.
Okay.
If we were showing that we were not going to be in the positive with cash flow. So the excess revenue line tells us the tale of where we may have to look and what kind of dollar amounts we may have to look to bring the budget in the black, so we don't spend ourselves to where we are in that negative cash balance area. But when we had to do that, we were showing negatives in the red with our cash balance as well for future years.
Yeah. Hypothetically speaking, when you look at the bottom line, which is your unreserved cash balance on 15.010, at the end of the 5 years, it's shown 1.35 million, right?
Correct.
And hypothetically speaking, if things get better within a 5-year period, which I would very much hope so, that number could actually be an additional 3 million.
Correct. We could be right around $5 million.
With the collections of taxes that you're anticipating being
Correct.
correct.
Correct, sir. That was the plan when we went out for what we did.
Alrighty. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does that answer everybody's questions? I just want to make sure that everybody's clear and doesn't have any further questions for me. Okay, I welcome feedback. I hope that this was presented in a clear, methodical way and non-confusing. I try to make it clear so everyone can understand, listeners at home. I even have my wife read assumptions and look at it. She's not, the most familiar with school finance. So if she reads it and says, yeah, I understand what you're saying, then I said, good, I did my job. So I hope that's seen throughout this document. But if anybody has any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
I just want to say thank you. I know a lot of time goes into this, and there's, like you said, pick a number between 1 and 100. And if we're lucky and we can bet correctly. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. I really appreciate that. Mr. Violi's laughing, I think, because he doesn't think that I did such a great job. I'm just teasing. He likes to give me a hard time.
CJ, I think you do a great job. Very great explanation also throughout the whole process. It's like the famous Matt Jordan said, this is only a snapshot in time, because if you look back 3 months, it looked completely, or 6 months, completely different picture.
Correct. And I mean, it could change tomorrow with any sort of announcement for all we know. So it's the best guess that we have right now. I typically look at this and modify it and try to work on it as I see things happen, just to give us projections and different models to work off of. I will continue to do so. And a few times a year, this past year, I kind of updated you with where we were at with collections and things like that. I will continue to do so in that fashion as I get some data in the coming months.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. That concludes my report if there's no other questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Scarsapino. Moving on then to board reports, Mrs. Baba.
I do have a really quick update on House Bill 70. You might remember that that's the bill that allows the state to take over school districts that are deemed to be failing and appoint basically a czar to run the school district. So the school board really has no say in the operation of the district, and that czar can make any changes he or she feels is appropriate. The Youngstown School District, which was the first school district that fell under the administration of the Academic Distress Commission, took the state to court over how that bill was approved. And just this past Wednesday, a couple of days ago, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that that the law governing the takeover of academically distressed school districts does not violate the Ohio Constitution. So that was a real disappointment for districts across the state, because we believe that education should be administered locally by a local board of education as opposed to being run from the state. And also there was quite a bit of concern about the way that this bill had been passed. So I don't know what next steps forward there would be, but I just wanted to give you an update on that because we had talked about it multiple times before. So apparently the Supreme Court thinks that the law is valid. It's my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Baba. Moving on to Mrs. Campbell.
I have no report for PTA, and for Educational Foundation, the list of the scholarship winners, little non-traditional way this year, was emailed out to the students. I believe it was yesterday. That's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Moving on to Mr. Gibson.
Yes, I've got a handy sports report here. Fall sports, the coaches are getting in contact, trying to get people ready, assuming we like to get everyone ready, like we talked about earlier, make sure if fall sports are allowed, that our students are ready to go. They're maintaining a no contact, though, as directed by OHSA. The field house, the stadium, they all remain closed until further notice. Sadly, the track was being used quite a bit. So beginning next week, Mr. TV Paw is scheduling college signing dates for senior athletes. So we attempted to play sports in college. Hopefully they have sports this fall at the college level. The athletic department has announced award winners for the most outstanding senior athlete for this past season. The recipients were Kaylee Klein and Chris Riley Richardson. Both of whom were fantastic to watch. And lastly, this should be exciting for everyone. Mr. TV Paw is submitting an affidavit to the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles for the creation of a specially licensed plate with a rocket logo and Streetsboro on the plate. He's got all the signatures he needed and submitted. So we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully it gets approved. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gibson. The only thing I wanted to say on behalf of the city is thanks to Mike Dahlbaugh and Bob Long for the ability. The mayor's been doing a regular radio show, but he's kicked that up to now twice a week, and the opportunity to speak to the community about the city's response in the pandemic. So I just wanted to say publicly to Mike and also to Bob Long and even Nate Hall, who's in on Friday nights with us, just thank you for that opportunity to share that information with the public. And our radio station's been very valuable, and I know the mayor appreciates that opportunity. Moving on to Mr. Violi.
Well, I don't have much to report. Maplewood's in the same position as we are in Streetsboro. I think our meeting will be more of a social distancing meeting, this next one coming up, instead of a video meeting. So hopefully we're going to try to get back to some sense of normalcy there. The one thing, if I can go back to the budget cuts from the state, since I do have fiscal integrity on my tag there, I just want to mention CJ did say that you said 40% of the cuts in that 700 million were school districts, correct?
Yeah.
I see DJ shaking his head yes. And I just wanted to mention that $0 were cut to state prisons. So through that whole cut, I would think, and that's a pretty big line item on the budget for the state. So 0 to prisons, 40% of it schools.
You wouldn't think the prisons would need as much money since they're releasing everybody, right?
Yep. Thought I'd mention it. That's all I got, Mr. Grimm. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Violi, thank you. Moving on to the next item, consent agenda items. Let me get caught up here. It is recommended the Board of Education approve the consent agenda, items B through M.
I'll move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who made donations, especially, let's see, we had the Rising Rockets Athletic Club donated almost $5,000 to the 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip. There were also donations from private citizens to different programs throughout the school district. So thank you to everybody. And also tonight on the consent agenda, we are doing the official approval of the list of 2020 graduating class from Streetsboro High School. Congratulations to everyone, and good luck in everything you do. And thanks to everybody who made this week possible for our seniors. Is any other discussion? Hearing none. CJ, please call for the vote.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to superintendent's recommendations. Mr. Dalbaugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have several, but before I do those, Mr. Grimm, I wanted you to know that the live stream has been going in and out, but the recording is fine. So if there's anyone out there, I think it was due to the storm, as soon as the meeting is over, the actual recording will go live on the website. So you'll be able to watch the entire board meeting without any interruption, but it did go in and out a little bit. But the recording is true and it's fine. And Andreas will post that at the conclusion of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So item A, digital learning. I gotta let my computer catch up here. Okay. It is recommended the Board of Education approve the resolution below with regards to digital learning.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion?
So what this is about, we had already approved a resolution allowing for blizzard bags, but because of the unusual circumstances of the pandemic, we have to approve this resolution that basically says that it was okay and permitted by law to do all digital instruction, and that we do not have to make these days up in person.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Scarsapino, please call for the vote.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes, that motion carries.
Thank you. Item B. It is recommended the Board of Education adopt the modification to the grading policy as outlined in the superintendent's report.
I'll move.
I'll second. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mr. Grimm, please bear with me for 1 second.
Sure.
I'm just trying to catch up on the resolution that was passed here. Okay. Can we just repeat who seconded and who?
I move. Denise.
Okay, thank you.
And I seconded that motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Violi.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Item C, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the revision to the 2021 calendar as shown in the attachment.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Uh, Shout out to Karen Bency in the treasurer's office. She found this when she was doing our workday calendars for next year. It's amazing how many eyes you put on something, and we discovered that we were short one teacher day. So we met with our teacher teams, and the consensus was that we're going to add that extra teacher day. We did not want to impact instruction, so we're adding a teacher day on Friday, August 14th, rather than starting on Monday, August 17th.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes?
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Violi.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
Item D, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the resolution for payment of full year and spring supplemental and pupil activity contracts as shown.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Been moved and properly seconded. Discussion?
Basically, we entered into negotiations with our association, and we are, our intent is to pay our academic supplemental contracts in full, because many of those folks had already completed all of their requirements for the year or continued to do so even in the digital environment. And with our athletics in the spring, we're proposing that we pay those at 60%.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
My final item, item E, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding between the Streetsboro City School District Board of Education and the Streetsboro Education Association with regards to extra duty compensation.
I'll move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Discussion?
This is then the MOU, or the memorandum of understanding, or the agreement between the school district, the Board of Education, and the union for the resolution that you just passed regarding the payment of supplementals.
Okay, any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes,
Mr. Violi.
Yes.
and that motion carries.
That concludes my recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Dalbaugh. Moving on to treasurer's recommendations, Mr. Scarsapino.
Yes, Mr. Grimm, I have two this evening. My first one, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the 5-year forecast as presented and authorize the treasurer to submit the forecast to the Ohio Department of Education.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Moved and properly seconded. Discussion?
We had the presentation this evening, and unless there's anything else to discuss. Okay,
All right, please call for the vote.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes, motion carries.
My second recommendation, it is recommended the Board of Education approve and enter into an agreement with TSA Consulting to become the third-party administrator for 403B plans.
I will make that motion.
I'll second.
Moved and properly seconded. Discussion?
Yes, currently the district or the Board of Education or their designee, which would be me, is the TPA for 403B plans. It has been that way for a long time in Streetsboro. I'm not quite sure why. Bringing TSA in ensures IRS compliance It ensures exceptional customer service to our staff. There is no cost to the district to manage this type of function. And all of our staff would be, no matter what 403B plan they have, will be grandfathered in with TSA. Now, this isn't changing their providers. The providers all stay the same. Some providers will say, like, we don't have enough people at Streetsboro, so we don't want to go to TSA. But TSA still grandfathers those providers in. They just wouldn't be able to accept any more from that supplier in some regards. Our biggest supplier is AXA. AXA works well with TSA as well as many of the other vendors that we have. This takes the burden off of the district to be that third-party administrator. What I will tell you is there are people that, you know, have retired 15 years ago and want to move money around in their 403Bs, and they have to submit paperwork to the district and to the treasurer's office to sign off in order for them to make those moves. We've created our own document that we sign at this point in time. That can cause some issues for the employee and for the district when you're talking about that type of thing happening from someone that retired 15 years ago. That takes that out of it. TSA handles that directly and in a smooth fashion because that's what they do. So it's the best interest for our staff, it's the best interest for our retirees, and it's the best interest for our district to move forward with this contract with TSA.
And CJ's not going to ever say this because he's very modest, but kudos to CJ for identifying this as a potential challenge and something that should not have been handled by the district. And he very quickly identified that and solved the problem. So I wanted to say hats off to CJ on that because he did this on his own and he figured it out with very little guidance. So I wanted to give a shout out to CJ.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Dahlbaugh. And also 403Bs need to be restated like every 10 years. That has come up. The deadline was extended to June 30th. By signing this contract, we are immediately covered under TSA's 403B protection, and that would be on them instead of the school district at that point.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? Okay, please call for the vote.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Violi.
Yes.
Motion carries.
That concludes my recommendations this evening, Mr. Grimm.
Thank you. Any new business? Any old business? Hearing none, moving on to board president's recommendations. Item A, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the revisions to policy 6.15 graduation diploma requirements.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call for the vote.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes, motion carries. And Mr. Dahlbaugh, just to confirm, we do not have a need for executive session tonight, correct?
We do not.
Okay, then at this time, I will ask, well, before we ask for that, just want to say thanks to Andreas. He's behind the scenes running the meeting tonight for us, keeping us online. And hopefully in June, we will be able to meet in person if all goes well. So at this time, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make,
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Probably not. Okay, hearing none, please call for the vote.
Those were the quickest moves and seconds I've heard all night.
It always is.
Mrs. Campbell,
yes.
Mr. Violi,
Yes.
Mrs. Baba,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Grimm.
Yes, and we are adjourned at 8:04 p.m. Have a good night, everyone, and continue to stay safe.
Good night.
Thank you, board.
Night.